All set. All right, thanks, Artie. All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Special Committee on the Hudson River Greenway, Bronx Community Board 8. Nice to see the people on Zoom. We have 3 committee members here in the office, and they are Deb Travis, Laura Spalter, and myself. So we do have a quorum. We have a 4-member committee, and we have 3 of us present. Again, welcome to everybody on Zoom. We have a special guest tonight, but before we get to that, we have to approve the minutes of the June 2023 meeting. The committee does not meet that often, and that was our last meeting. And I hope that the committee members had an opportunity to review the minutes. Do we motion to approve? Okay. No objections, no abstentions. Minutes are approved. Okay, thank you very much. So we will move on to our guest speaker, who is present here tonight. I'm happy to say his name is Jerry Bogash. He is the Director for Planning and Program Management at NMTC, the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. He also happens to be a neighbor of ours in Bronx Community Board 8. Jerry, would you say just a few words about NMTC, about what it is?
Sure, and happy to be here, everybody. So NMTC is one of over 400 regional councils throughout the country that are required by the federal legislation that creates transportation funding. So basically the federal government in regions like this and elsewhere in the country doesn't say, here's the money and this is what you'll do with it. It says, here's the money, come together as a council, figure out what to do with it, follow our planning process, and then if you meet all our requirements, we'll consider obligating funding for the projects that you pick. So because we don't have a national government, we have a federal government. So these councils exist for the purpose of planning for and deciding on what will happen to federal money that comes into regions like this. And in our region, that's very significant. In our current 5-year transportation improvement program, we have just over $14 billion that come in federally. Of course, we have an enormous transportation system in this region. By the way, NMTC covers New York City. It covers 3 counties in the lower Hudson Valley and Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island. So in that area, the transportation system is extensive. It tends to be very old. There's a huge need for resources, and it's always nice to have $14 billion coming in to try to meet needs. So I work with a staff to NMTC. NMTC is all the member agencies constitute the council. 5 suburban county executives, 2 New York City commissioners, the State Commissioner of Transportation, and the MTA's Chief Executive Officer are the voting members. So they're charged with making decisions of how this funding is going to be used. And I work for them, as do my colleagues, to basically follow the planning process that's required in the federal regulations. It involves doing things like creating a long-range plan, a program of projects that will receive funding, a 5-year program usually, and there's also a work program that brings in planning dollars from the federal government for studies and so forth. And this whole process results in projects being implemented and reimbursed federally for usually 80%. And those projects could be anything on the surface, basically. It doesn't cover aviation. You're talking about roadways, you're talking about bridges, transit, walkways, greenways, the whole 9 yards. A federally eligible system that we are basically planning for, which is most but not all of the transportation system in our. As I said, we also bring in money for studies, and 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, there was a study adopted through NMTC of the Greenway, or it was called the Hudson Valley Greenway Link. It means we were charged with trying to link the Greenway in northern Manhattan to the Greenway in southern Westchester. Mm-hmm. included obviously this area. And that went on for, wow, 3-4 years. I was actually the second project manager at the end of that effort, and we did produce a report, which I think, Bob, you have. Pretty extensive report with design concepts and so forth. But the fact that that was linking these two locations and using local streets, finally that's where it fell by the wayside because of objections about the local streets. But the concepts for what was next to the river are still pretty valid. You know, I mean, there's information in that effort that about ownership of land and so forth that still could be used even now.
And as I think you know, Jerry, what the community board decided and voted on 2014 was to have a greenway that runs along the river. You know, I mean, we didn't address every inch of the greenway, but we want to stay off the local streets and stay on the riverfront to the maximum extent possible. There are obstacles on the riverfront, as you well know, and as we know, and they're going to have to be addressed. But, you know, the goal is a riverfront greenway like the one in Manhattan, to, you know, as I say, to the extent possible.
The link study was to look at the fact that there's a greenway that was, the vision was extending from Lower Manhattan up till, I don't know, Albany or something. I forget where the termination point was.
Albany.
I think so. In this particular area, it was very, very difficult because of the topography. You know, you have the ship canal, well, the train, but the train actually offers some opportunities too, you know. But you have the ship canal, you have the Everwild Park, Riverdale Park, and you have some steep slopes and so forth. You got to get down and over, and it was really challenging. And you know, that was part of the design concepts of the study, was looking at how that might be bridged. You know,
I think that's, you know, that's maybe paradoxically somewhat encouraging to hear that this is a particularly difficult area in which to build a greenway, you know, because, as I say, the resolution was passed in 2014, it'll be 10 years this year, and, you know, we seem in some respects no closer than we were 10 years ago. In some respects, we are closer, and we're going to talk about that tonight. You know, I think understanding that we face a particularly challenging topography is, you know, it's good for people to hear, to understand why it's taking so long.
We always felt 10 years ago that there's a reason the link wasn't there. And that's because it's very difficult and very expensive to put it there.
That's
you know?
Right.
And, of course, a part of that could be established, but our charge was to look it up, you know, so we had to do the whole area. And,
right. So as you know, Jerry, since NIMTIC did the study, Metro North commissioned a study. They were given funding for a study. They commissioned that study, which was delivered in 2018, and which did identify some feasible routes. It did not specify certain routes as the preferred routes. It simply offered a couple of alternatives in places where there could be alternatives. That's the most recent study that we have, and that's where things stand at this point.
Right, and of course the railroad is important in this because of their ownership of the right-of-way there, which has been there for 100 years or whatever, and so the railroad was an important part of the original effort too, and they didn't object to the original effort, but they've always been concerned about the planning that's happening because it affects them. You know?
Right.
And
the same was true of the 2018 study.
Yeah, absolutely.
They had no objection to it, but of course they're going to be concerned about any construction or anything that takes place because they don't want their operations affected. And frankly, you know, nobody wants their operations affected.
Sure.
It's an important part of the transportation network in the area.
Absolutely. And then they have a railroad to run. You know, they have to do that.
Right.
So.
They're not in the greenway business.
Right. Yeah. But at least from the study that ended in 2014, it would seem to be that there was a way to create a greenway that would not interfere with their operations.
Right.
And we took as much as we could, and they're one of our member agencies, so we kind of had to. We took their concerns and their needs into account in establishing what we ultimately discovered. So there is a possibility there, but it's complicated and it will be expensive. There's no question.
So let's talk about the recent development that you and I have had conversations about. In the wake of Hurricane Sandy, Metro-North began hardening its infrastructure, as they put it. They took some power lines, some underground power lines, and put them above ground, encased in, I don't even know what you would call those things. Conduits, yeah, metal conduits that, are very visible because they're above ground now. And they also took their switches and raised them. They're on platforms now that, with several steps. I don't know, it's hard to judge when you're riding past it on the train, but it looks like they're, maybe 3 or 4 feet off the ground now. So, and that seemed to be the extent of what they were going to do. But then more recently, as I discovered, I had heard about Metro-North resiliency studies and Metro-North resiliency concerns and so on, and I began doing a little bit of research. And as I shared with you, Metro-North has finally come around to recognizing that they have a serious problem with the Hudson Line because of its proximity to the river, but also because the river is rising, as we know. As sea levels rise, the river is rising. And Metro-North identified the 2 places on the Hudson Line that are most vulnerable to flooding. One is in Tarrytown, and the other is the stretch from Spuyten Duyvil to Riverdale. So they have their engineer, I shouldn't say I'm not sure they've got a dozen engineers, but one of their chief engineers has reported to Metro-North that unless steps are taken to introduce resiliency along the waterfront to protect the riverfront, the Hudson Line will be subject to regular flooding by the year 2050. We're not talking about, once in a lifetime storm or once in a decade storm. Right? We're talking about heavy rainfall. It will just be a regular occurrence. And so you and I spoke about this, and you said, well, let me look into this and see if I can find anything about it. And would you share with everybody what you've done?
And this is publicly available. It's not inside baseball by any means. And by the way, I think the 2018 study, which I didn't follow closely, but I believe the 2018 study was built on an assumption by the railroad that something would have to be done in terms of resiliency and then combined.
Not exactly. What they did do was they required that the greenway itself be elevated, certain, I don't want to quote the figure and get it wrong, but several feet above the mean river level, because of course they didn't want the greenway washing up on the tracks.
Sure.
Which has happened, which is exactly what happened in Sandy and some other storms. But they didn't really directly address the question of the riverfront itself.
Okay. So, but in terms of, the process I described, each member agency of NMTIC is responsible for whatever it's responsible for, okay? So it has a jurisdiction over, facilities and equipment, and has to provide service and what have you. So MTA has a very substantial planning process for its facilities and services. What they usually do is they do a 20-year needs assessment, looking long-term. And then out of that, they create a 5-year capital program. Their normal cycle. They're working on, the current capital program runs through 2022, I believe. They have that wrong, actually.
2022?
I think so. Maybe it's later than that, yeah, because that was 2 years ago.
Right.
It's going to be up soon.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't remember the exact period. But so they've done a 20-year capital needs assessment, which they released last fall. Okay. And that capital needs assessment, which is available publicly online, as far as I understand, identified, and I checked this with my contacts at PA, identified resiliency needs for the Hudson Line, not surprising, although it doesn't seem to be very specific about where or what those needs are, and identified the need for potential funding for detailed design study of those resiliency needs for the Hudson Line.
Mhm.
That's what I was able to find out. So, you know, that's in their 20-year capital needs assessment. And it would seem, I think there may be applying for some of the federal money through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to do that study, but I'm not exactly sure, and you should certainly find out from them, because they don't necessarily tell us everything that they're doing, so. But, you know, does that provide an opportunity? Possibly, you know, and I believe, in a way similar to what happened in 2018, there's always the possibility of engaging with the railroad as it does its work, seeing if they would be open to, you know, considering something related to the Greenway in that work. One of the issues, and Bob, you and I discussed this, one of the issues for any kind of Greenway in that area is who's going to build it, who's going to maintain it, you know?
Right.
It's a huge issue, and, you know, because I believe most of the land down there, if I recall from the study, is railroad right away. And that which isn't, I don't know who has jurisdiction over that. You go out over the water. But then once you build something like that, obviously you have to maintain it. It's got to be lit. You know, there's a cost for lighting it. It's got to be safe, and it can't, like, deteriorate over time, you know. Right. So all that has to be part of it. Funding is certainly part of it, but the ultimate owner and operator of the Greenway is always an issue. And it's not only an issue here, it's actually an issue whenever you're trying to establish greenways, walkways near the river, particularly. You know, it's similar things are happening in Tarrytown right now, where they're trying to work on some paths and so forth. So that's always an issue. It's very different when you're trying to do something on a roadway, because the ownership of the roadway is clear, you know. Somebody owns it and maintains it, but you're talking about a piece of land next to a river, between a railroad and a river.
Right, right.
And
so the study area that, from 2018 ran from Spuyten-Duyvil up to Ludlow and Yonkers, which meant that, it's both Bronx, New York City, but also Yonkers, which is Westchester. Would lead me to think that probably we're talking about a state agency here. That, you know, that would seem, it's hard to imagine that, you know, the city would be responsible up to the city line, and Yonkers or Westchester would be responsible beyond. It's possible, right, it's possible. But, you know, knowing the city, and, you know, there's a constant, you know, we see what we're going through right now, where we're cutting parks, you know, and cutting other things in the budget. It's hard to imagine the city taking on additional responsibility, you know, for inspection, maintenance, and so on. I think the prospects of you know, some sort of, and maybe it's more than one agency, you know, maybe it's not just state parks, maybe it's state parks and state DOT, I don't know, but I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you have?
No, it's hard to say. You know, state DOT would be interesting in that it's far afield from any state DOT facilities, or any state roadways that they're responsible for.
That's right.
DEC maybe?
It's possible, but I don't know if they have the operational capacity to actually maintain a facility, you know. But I think, you know, if we had followed through from the 2014 study, this would have been the next hurdle to tackle, you know. Because if even coming to a conclusion about funding, if you know, approaching the members of NIMTIC about potential federal funding, which was on the table at the time, you know, it's like who would actually execute the project? You know, who's going to sponsor that funding? And then ultimately, who translates into the maintainer and owner of the facility? That hadn't ever been, although there were some, I believe there were some recommendations in the study for possibilities. It had never been really taken up. And it's a major issue with regard to anything in this area. You know.
Sure.
It's not that it can't be solved, but it'll take work. And of course, knowing what the facility is an important part of that, you know. Having some idea of what the facility would look like, how much it might cost, and so forth. Or any agency can be engaged to either build it or take care of it. You know, they need to know what it is.
Right, no, I understand. Going back to the resiliency question, so there's nothing yet to indicate, so far as you know, from what you've read, nothing yet to indicate what form this resiliency is going to take.
From what I understand, no.
Right.
But it's specified in the 20-year capital needs assessment as a long-term need.
Right.
And interestingly, it's not far as I could tell, it's not specified for sections of the Hudson line, it's the Hudson line.
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
And there's also been flooding issues, due to storms in Ossining and points north, north of Westchester and so forth. So it seems to be the entire line has to be assessed in terms of what might be done.
The part that is on the north side of the Harlem River?
Possibly. I don't know that for sure.
It's just very close to the water there as well.
Yep. I think, well, yeah, I mean, and the Hudson River may have I don't know what the hydrological, assessment of that in terms of the Harlem River, the Ship Canal, the Hudson River, which one for the storm surges really absorbs the water, Sandy was all storm surge and up the Hudson River and came across,
On the Environment and Sanitation Committee, there was a lot of concern with the Army Corps of Engineers work, because so much of their focus was on building up other parts of the borough so that more water would stay in the channel and stay in the river. And so our concern was, well, but they're not doing anything along our side of the Harlem, so that it would possibly increase flooding.
And there's you have to look at
resiliency everywhere else. The water's got to go someplace.
You have to look at a systems
and
level.
we sent that in.
Yeah.
There's a very strong objection to it.
Right.
The unintended consequences.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Jerry, as you may know, the city got a raise grant to study a greenway that would run from Randall's Island to Marble Hill.
yes.
Which, and the hope is that in Marble Hill, there's an obstacle there with the Metro North rail yard where they store some of their equipment. But the hope is that will then connect to an extension of the Putnam Greenway that is going to be developed south of Van Cortlandt Park down to 230th Street. What I do know is that study is going to happen. There is at present, I know, no thought to who the operating authority will be for that greenway, if and when it's built.
That's part of the issue for that.
Right, and that's part of the issue down there as well. So, we're sort of in the same boat, so to speak, in the sense that...
Well, but it's a little bit different here because, first of all, it's not just the city.
Right.
There's an obvious connection to Yonkers.
Right.
And then when we did the study 10 years ago, the city of Yonkers was involved. We met with the mayor. Westchester County was involved. But, Westchester County is a member, so it was easy for us to engage everybody who needed to be engaged. And there's an obvious linkage in Yonkers along the waterfront, Now, could the Greenway not go into Yonkers? Yeah, that's possible. But, I think there's also interest politically in Yonkers.
I believe there is. In fact, I know there is. That's something I'll get to in a few minutes, because Laura and I have both met with people in Yonkers, including their director of sustainability. But is it, again, we're in the realm of the hypothetical here. It is conceivable that Metro North might build some sort of infrastructure along the riverfront, which could conceivably be an infrastructure that might also support the Greenway.
Conceivable, sure. And again, until that's looked at in a detailed way, in terms of what needs to be done on the resiliency side, and what does that result in? Is it a higher seawall? Is it more riprap? Is it out into the river somehow, which has its own environmental? What is it that could be done there? You could conceivably look at what does that mean for potential. But I have no idea whether they're interested in that or that's something to find out from MTA and the railroad.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not going to do something. They're not going to choose one method over another because it would benefit the Greenway. I'm sure they're going to choose whichever method works best for Metro North. Right.
That's a good bet.
And the hope is that it will be something. Well, let's say, to avoid the worst case scenario, let's hope that it's not something that would in some way inhibit the construction, of the Greenway, whether it would benefit Greenway or not. But clearly what we need to do is we need to keep track of this with Metro North and with the MTA and, have some conversation with them. And I would think that, probably the most logical way to go about that is through our state elected officials, since the MTA is a state authority.
Yeah, I think that would be I'm not suggesting you do that, but that
No,
makes
no, I
sense.
understand. Right,
you know,
yeah.
so.
Yeah, okay. So, is there anything else? I mean, we can open it up and see if there are any questions.
Sure, I would just point out that, again, as part of this process, there is potential resources for study of this, and also ultimately for the construction of something. But it's very important that the member, the city of Yonkers potentially be kept in the loop if you really want. They're the ones who are going to be making the decision, and not so much for the city of Yonkers, but Westchester, on any funding that might be put to this in the future. So the elected officials are important, obviously, but these are also the decisions of city commissioners, county executive in Westchester, and so forth, in terms of how federal money might be used.
Right.
That's several steps down the road from where you are now, but that again was the next step that was going to need to be tackled after the 20.
Right.
How does this work? We have a concept, that's nice, but how do we get it designed? And where do you get the funding to build it? And you're talking about, again, because of the topography, I can't remember, frankly, I should have looked before I came, but I'm pretty sure we're talking about tens of millions of dollars back in 2014.
Oh, yeah.
To actually get down to the river and go along the river and come back up again.
Well, in 2018, this study was saying we're probably looking at $100 million for the entire thing from Spuyten-Duyvil to Yonkers, and that was 2018.
And that's without the access from the local roads.
Yeah, this is just the Greenway itself.
Just the Greenway itself.
Right.
Getting to the Greenway was the other issue.
Access points is a real problem.
Huge issue. Some of them, there are access points there. Some of them are private. Going back 100 years, private access to the waterfront. Yacht Club is there, of course. And how do you get across the Ship Canal foremost, and then get to the Greenway on the other side? And looked at several options for doing that. Including the swing bridge, which has its own structural issues in terms of doing anything with it, And
if I understand, and again, this falls entirely within your area, Jerry, there are plans for high-speed rail between Albany and Manhattan that would require replacing that bridge because it doesn't have the capacity. Again, this is lay language, and I may have it totally wrong, but you'll correct me. That bridge may have to be replaced if there is a high-speed rail introduced between Albany and Manhattan.
Well, many things would have to be replaced if there was high-speed rail in that area, and the bridge being one of them, but also the Empire branch there from 25th Street down to Penn Station, which was rehabilitated for the service. That was about 10, 15 years ago also, and I would think for anything that would be high-speed, would have to be a large amount of infrastructure investment, tracks, and of course that bridge is built for one purpose and has to open. That's the other thing that's very challenging. It has to open because that's a navigable waterway. And again, 10 years ago, Amtrak was telling us at the time that there was no immediate plan to replace the bridge, but that at some point down the road, that was going to happen. And the options we ultimately chose didn't include the swing bridge because it was too unknown when that might be that they might replace the swing. But they did say that you can't hang. They didn't feel that you could hang the Greenway off the side of the swing bridge because of the nature of the structure. They also had security concerns at the time. Of course, this was closer to 9/11. Security concerns about people being anywhere near the swing bridge. So,
there are safety issues, that's for sure.
Yeah. Even if you did hang it off the side of the swing bridge, you're still right next to a rail line.
Right next to the railroad.
A lot of issues at the Ship Canal.
One other thing I wanted to mention, and I'm sure you're aware of this, the city last year, the city passed a law to update the Greenway map. There is a citywide Greenway map that dates back to 1993. That's in progress and is supposed to be completed this year. In 1993, just to provide some perspective, the Hudson River Greenway that we're talking about was on the map as planned but unbuilt.
Right.
And here we are 30 years later.
Right. And it probably goes back before that,
Planned and
to tell you the truth, you know.
But at least, you know, what's changed is that there are greenways all over the city now, and there really is an effort to have a completely integrated citywide greenway, and that's the purpose of this plan, to identify the routes that will constitute that citywide greenway.
Well, the other thing I think also, and you're probably aware of this, the use of the waterfront has been under scrutiny in New York City for a decade or more, you know. Hudson River Park, primary example. You know? Right. So along with greenways by the waterfront, it's also what else is by the waterfront. A number of parks have been established, and so forth, and Brooklyn and the Bronx, you know. So it's all of a piece. It's all of a piece. And certainly more parks make for the opportunity for things like greenways in the park, you know. So
let's see if there are any questions. I see David Gilman's hand is up. Hello, David.
Hi there. Yeah, Jerry, just a quick question. I didn't quite hear, I'm having trouble hearing you guys. I've got my volume up to 90% and still having trouble hearing you. But for you, Jerry, do you know what they're doing at the Turntable Bridge right now? They've got quite a bit of equipment and cranes that appear to be operating at the site there. Are you aware of what they're up to right now?
I'm not, and that's mainly because the funding that comes for Amtrak doesn't come through the process I described. It's a separate process. It generally comes directly from Congress, and it's administered by the Federal Railroad Administration. We don't deal with that, so Amtrak rarely shares detailed plans with us in terms of how they're maintaining. I assume, David, it's probably maintenance activity. I'm not aware of anything that would be replacing that bridge, but who knows? You know,
There's no pseudo water cooler conversations.
Not with me. And not
All right,
between Amtrak and the agencies that I deal with.
No,
so.
no, I understand. It's just that they've had more than one crane and it's been there for a couple of months, so that suggests to me more than, you know, simple maintenance work. But I don't know. But thank you.
Sure.
Not seeing any other hands. I don't.
Cliff.
Oh, Cliff. Oh, okay.
Sorry, there are two of me there. Sorry. Hi, Jerry. Cliff Stanton from Friends of the Hudson River Greenway. So I'm sure Bob shared this with you, but I thought it might be helpful for the group to hear that. Was it over a month now, Bob? 2 months ago, we attended a seminar for the Environmental Bond Act, and became clear that this particular project might be a stretch under that program, because we're not a disadvantaged community. But when we presented our conundrum to the officials who were there, specifically that, next step is trying to secure money for an engineering study, and we expressed, the problem that we've encountered is that no one is able to fund a study using capital expenditures. Everyone nodded their head, and we asked, what should we do? And they all said NIMTIC. So, I guess I'm curious to find out, how, aside from doing the necessary outreach again to the MTA, is there a role that NIMTIC can play here? Am I getting too far ahead of myself here?
Not really.
Okay.
I think you have to take these things into account. It's a little bit ahead of where you are, but not a lot. And there's a role that can be played with federal money to do design work for a facility. But to get to that, you have to get to a commitment
Yeah.
to put money on the transportation improvement program for a project, you know, and again, the feds don't normally, well, some of this discretionary funding that's coming down might be able to do this, but the feds don't normally commit to funding, say, design work without a commitment to actually doing the project.
Right.
Because then that's just throwing money after something that wouldn't necessarily happen, you know, and they don't like to do that.
Yeah.
So it's always good to have a commitment to the entire project before you actually design the thing. And you may have a concept, which, you know, you can do planning studies like we did and say, yes, it's feasible and here's a concept for it. But when you're really getting into the engineering and design work, that's extremely detailed. You're actually engineering the structure, you know, whatever it's.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the feasibility study, as wonderful as it was, didn't do. I'm guessing it didn't do enough of what the MTA needs long term in terms of resiliency, right? Yeah, there was some riprap. There were some walls to be built. So I'm not. I guess the challenge for us, Bob, is I don't think the MTA might necessarily look at that feasibility study, which they probably don't even remember, as something that would solve their problem. In other words, a new design would be required that has little bearing, or maybe some bearing, to the original feasibility study, but really would in some ways reinvent the wheel.
Well, yeah, and it's a question of what the wheel even is, you know, in terms of what they might do in that area on the resiliency front might change what the area even looks like. And you're right, Bob, so that could potentially preclude, you know, depending on what it is. Who knows? You know, so.
Yeah. But Jerry, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the most likely way to get the engineering and environmental study that, you know, which we've been talking about for some time now, as part of the whole project, is really as phase one of the entire project. Get a commitment to build the greenway, and then phase one is, well, we have to do a design study, engineering study now.
So the money that financed the study that ended in 2014, that's not even, we couldn't have done the design work other than conceptual design with that money. It's not eligible for planning money, you know. And again, they want to see the commitment to the project before they get into paying for these very detailed designs that would result in the project. So.
Well, that was the same with the 2018. That's essentially a conceptual study as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can do a lot with a conceptual study, but it's not a design for the structure.
You know. I mean, given the let me just say this, Deb, okay? I mean, given the kind of money we're talking about, I mean, this is only going to happen with federal money. I mean, you're not going to.
I think you're going to end up, well, and this is just me speculating, okay? So it's probably good to look at a financing package. You don't necessarily, like Cliff mentioned, the environmental bond or state funding, okay? Yeah, well, that could be part of the mix. It's not going to be the lion's share necessarily. So federal money might be involved, state money might be involved, local money might be involved. A lot of these large projects are now done with combinations of funding sources. And there's actually, and again, there's federal credit out there now too, but then you have to pay it back, you know, over time. And
I'm sorry, federal credit, what are you referring to?
So they extend loans essentially for projects. And then they expect, you know, very low interest return on the loan. But that's normally used for facilities that have a revenue source. Like, for example, the replacement of the Tappan Zee Bridge used federal credit, you know. But tolls are going to pay that back over time, you know. There are no tolls on the greenway. So that would have to be paid back by an agency as part of debt service. And wouldn't have an obvious revenue source. So there's a number of different ways to finance something like this. And you probably shouldn't assume it's only going to be one source, given the amount, you know.
Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, with the DEC, as Cliff said, the problem there is that they highly prioritize environmental justice areas, which I understand. And we're not, although Southwest Yonkers is an environmental justice area.
It is indeed.
Marble Hill is an environmental justice area.
Yeah, but
the
it's,
lower part.
yeah, it is. It's outside, the scope of the
Right,
study
just
we
at
were
the
talking about.
side, yeah.
It's close, but, you know.
But it might
about
be
a
an
mile
angle
away.
for connections
Might
and
be.
stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
and the other thing is that although we call them communities of concern are emphasized, not the only criteria, you know.
No, I know that,
Right, so,
yeah.
so clearly it doesn't help if you don't have one in play, but Southwest Yonkers is certainly connected to Yonkers, that's certainly a community of concern.
Yeah. Well, one of the DEC issues is access to the waterfront. I mean, that is one of the things they're looking to fund. And, you know, we have no access to the waterfront now, except for that tiny little park that you get to only by going through the Riverdale Metro North station.
Right, exactly, which
And
is
which,
what
by
I
the
did
way,
as a
is
kid,
eroding.
by the way.
Yeah.
And you have to run across the tracks, and,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
only
right.
real access.
Well, I just have one question about, one of the things that's changed since the original study is congestion pricing. And so now the city's thinking about how to keep cars out of the city and get people onto public transportation further out of the perimeter. Is parking also part of, like, is there a different angle to, like, obviously they need to make upgrades and improvements to these railroad stations for resiliency because they're right on the water, but also it seems like they need to increase their capacity for cars, any spots, because there's, like, you can't park there when you get to the train station.
Right, but the problem is the ability to do that, the availability of land to expand parking. And you can imagine what the response would be if they wanted to build a parking structure at Riverdale Station. So you can really only go up. There's parkland there, there's private land there, you know, there's not much space to move into. But you're right, congestion pricing, makes park and ride more of an issue, you know, that you need to get people to, so we call that first mile, last mile, you know, it's how do you get to the service?
Right,
and
right.
from the service, you know.
Right.
And it's a big issue, not only in the Bronx, but also Westchester and Putnam. But I would think at Riverdale Station, it's very, very constrained and really wouldn't have much option for building more parking.
And it's the same at Spuyten Duyvil as well.
Oh, yeah, even worse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Much worse.
so it's a good point, though.
Yeah. Let's see, we have Jody?
Hey there. Hey, Jerry, good to see you again after, 15 years?
That's right.
So,
Still around, yes.
yeah, parking at Spuyten Duyvil is even worse because it is the street. It's DOT. It's the only free parking on the entire Hudson line. Everything else is you have to pay. So people do drive from Westchester to park at Spuyten Duyvil so that they could park for free. So that congestion pricing could put a lot more pressure in the neighborhood for street parking. A couple of things. That Greenway map from 1993, the Hudson River Greenway legislation wasn't even passed yet. I think that's the residual from the 1970s map that Freddie Ferrer did, where he put a bunch of people in a room with maps and they just drew lines on the map without really looking at topography or anything like that. Diane Sargent was on that committee. I have that proposal somewhere. So, you know, that wasn't the Hudson River Greenway at the time. Other couple of things, the Spuyten Duyvil was underwater during Irene and Sandy, the station itself. And I remember, was it Ossining that had 8 feet of mud during Hurricane Floyd?
Ossining, yes.
Right, that was my coastal cleanup day, and Metro North had me cancel it because they couldn't cross us over because they were like, we got to go dig the station out. And then on top of that, all the mudslides. There's been numerous mudslides in the last couple of years. During Sandy, we had the Villa Bronte had a mudslide down. Hebrew Home did construction. They had a mudslide, that giant mudslide that just happened. So there's a lot happening down there. The 20-year assessment is online. I just Googled it and found it. So that's easy to find. The bridge thing, David, I believe that's the submarine cable replacement. The previous project was finishing the Sandy damage repairs. I think this one is replacing the underwater cables for the power for the bridge. That was I think that was presented in like 2022 for their first proposal. And then the last thing is the big thing. We've had this conversation when I was on the state committee for the Bronx link to the Hudson River Valley Greenway in 1996. Again, who's going to take care of it? They'll want to do their own engineering studies. They'll want to do their own design. And right now, you know, Bob and Deb and, you know, you all know, Parks is getting decimated. They can't even cut down trees that fall across the trail. I was out for 2 hours on Sunday cutting down a huge tree that blocked the trails because Parks doesn't even have a chainsaw to do it in our district. So I think that that's the big hurdle that we've never solved in a quarter of a century. Whose greenway is it going to be? Who's going to build and who's going to design and build it and maintain it? The pocket park at Riverdale Station was my idea. And DEC, DEC did the plans for it, but then they just kind of, you know, like, oh, Parks will whatever, but I don't even know who takes care of that. And that one got all washed out during Sandy as well. So there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues, and probably the Spuyten Duyvil station may need to be redone soon too, because that was last done in maybe 20 years ago. So I think if we could tie it into what Metro North has to do anyway. Cliff mentioned a wall. At one time, they were talking about putting a 5-foot wall. You know, they could make a walkway on top of the wall. So there's a lot of possibilities, but I think the only way it could really happen is if we tied it into some other project that Metro North or Amtrak was going to do.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we've been discussing, Jody. So we're all in agreement on that. And the operating authority, as we were discussing, is an important issue that has to be addressed at some point.
Well, I know, but when I agree with you, I want you to know I agree with you since I disagree a lot. You know, so. I'm
aware, Jody. I'm aware.
So I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement. MTA. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
All right.
Thomas, you're up.
Honestly, she covered a lot of what I was going to say anyhow. If you you design this project, you fund it, you put it in, and something happens to the commuter railway, they're going to step over you with the cranes and all the stuff that they need to do whatever it is they have to do, and they're going to lay waste to it in the process. So it's very much has to be part of the MTA's plan. And I will tell you that 50 years ago, I actually went to contract to rent the Riverdale station from them and used to go down there frequently myself before it was burned down. So I do have a historical connection to the area. And with the water going up as it is, we're going to have to make some type of plans, and those plans are going to supersede any private water rights that exist. I mean, there's no way you can give somebody a hole in the dike because they have private water rights. They're going to have to raise the entire thing, and the walkway on top of that wall really makes the most sense because they got to do the wall eventually anyway. I would love to have that gravel walk right out alongside the tracks into the water. It's a beautiful thing, and maybe we could put some boat launches in somewhere, but it's history. We can't do it anymore. We can't have that right next to the railroad tracks, especially electrified tracks. It's impractical to just keep fixing it over and over again. So I'd like to see you proceed with a unified plan like that and pay attention to all these various piles that are being driven in the Hudson alongside us here and what's attached to them. Are they part of that underwater generating thing that Bloomberg started? Is it a seawall they're planning on? You know, you see a lot of this stuff next to the FDR Drive. They did a whole project there and then they kind of stopped. And I see a couple of the same piles being driven over here in the Hudson, but nobody seems to know exactly what they are. Someone's got a mandate to change these things, and they're not letting us in on it. The swing bridge, again, you probably could tack a greenway on the side of it, but it's got so many other things wrong with it. They don't want to, add a toothpick.
Well, you're certainly right that whatever happens has to be done in coordination with Metro North. There's no question about that. You know, we can't interfere with their operations. We know that. So whatever planning we do, they're going to have to be part of the planning. There's no question about it.
Have you ever seen one of their leases?
No.
Well, if you see the type of power that it gives them, first off, the thing was 2 inches thick. So to begin to understand it, I couldn't even imagine, but it basically says, if we need you, you get out of here. And you do it immediately. So I would expect you're going to see the same type of accommodation. If it's part of a retaining wall, they're not going to move it. They're going to lift over it. If you're not part of a retaining wall, if you're just there on stilts, they're going to end up crushing it. And they're eventually...
We have a long way to go yet.
I'm sorry.
And certainly, as I say, we're going to be in consultation with them, but, we can conjure all kinds of scenarios that could be favorable or unfavorable, but, this is a long, ongoing process. And we're certainly going to have to, as I say, cooperate with Metro North. And, we'll take this step by step as we go.
I mean, they might regrade the track and just raise it up.
I don't believe that's a feasible option.
You have to rebuild the whole thing.
Right.
Thanks
for the cautionary words.
Well, they have this strange arrangement that redoes the ballast underneath the tracks. It's actually a car that reaches under and repiles it. So raising the tracks a couple inches at a time may not be as strange an operation as you think it is.
All right. Well, thanks for the background on that. It's very helpful. We want to go on to a few other people whose hands are raised.
Thank you.
Sure. And next up, we have Dr. Morrow. Hang on a second. We have to unmute you.
You have to unmute yourself, Dr. Morrow.
Yeah, you're good to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Bob Morrow, and here representing Southwest Yonkers, also known as a disadvantaged community to the DEC, and a lot of money is starting to be invested. And I guess I get the right to speak because I've been paddling past this area for many years, and because I used to have a practice for about 40 years in North Riverdale. Regardless, the point I'm like to make is 3 or 4 quickly. I've been watching and attending Rails to Trails and Rails and Trails. They keep changing the name back and forth. In any case, it seems that around the country where there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for doing this, of having Rails and Trails, and that includes New York State, with several upstate areas having Rails and Trails shared and some transformations. These are accomplished, according to these various meetings from around the country, by having people meet together with the various actors, which includes the state government, the local governments, the rails folks and the various community groups that are very interested in it. And as we put this idea forward in our environmental centers and various groups, the Bike Club in Yonkers, there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm to do this, and particularly in the age where we're trying to take away pollution from the atmosphere so that we don't all drown. And having people have access to a way to get from Yonkers to Manhattan by bike, foot, scooter, is tremendously popular and can be brought into meetings to try to do these things. City government has flipped on this question. Before they were against it for reasons which are obscure. The city government in Yonkers is very much in favor. We've met with them and in favor of doing this kind of trail. People in Hastings are very much in favor. There's no reason we can't get groups together to discuss the mechanisms of doing this. And the folks from Rails and Trails are happy to help out. And those are the key points I wanted to make. I'm hearing a lot of doom and gloom about the wide awake giant that's going to smack us if we try to put a trail next to the railroad. I would point out there's a trail there already for the sugar plant, which doesn't use it. And that's small grade, small gauge rail that isn't used, totally rusted out, the tires are gone. That gives at least 12 feet worth of trail, just that. And all we would need to do for that for the moment would be to erect a fence between that and the rest of the active rail lines. So I don't think we need to think doom and gloom. We need to think of how do we get these various players together in a room and talking about how we're going to move forward. And I'll tell you, we in Yonkers are very happy to move forward with these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morrow. We have tried in the past with Metro North. They refer to it as Track 6. And I know that the Domino Sugar Plant now uses trucks. It doesn't use trains anymore. They've been reluctant, Metro North in the past was very reluctant to make any sort of commitment to removing that track because they said they may need it from time to time. And in fact, I have to say, although not recently, in the past, I have seen equipment on that track when they use it for, I guess, repair work or whatever they use it for.
Staging.
Right, yeah. So I don't know, I mean, it would be wonderful if, we could take over that property.
There's a siding there that may not be part of tracks. And again, I would urge you to go back and look at the detailed work that was done in the original, the 2014 study, because a lot of that was explored. How to get around the filtration plant, how to use, in the Ludlow area, how to use what's there near what used to be the sugar plant and so forth.
Yeah.
There was an awful lot explored in that stuff.
In the 15 years since then, it's all changed, and we are eager to sit down at tables and discuss it rather than doom and gloom. And I will say that we're going to have a large park that they said we would never get at Ludlow. We have a relationship with the sugar plant because they are afraid that we're going to block the streets. We have relationships because we sit down and talk, and the government's willing to do that with us in Westchester and in Yonkers. So, frankly, hearing the doom and gloom about, in 1914, we couldn't do this. We didn't have a president looking to try to decarbonize the atmosphere. It's a different age, different sums of money, which were unthinkable in the past. And they are available for this kind of trail.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bob. I should also say something I was going to say later, but it seems like the right moment for it. I wanted to thank you for setting up a meeting in November, which I attended along with committee member Laura Spalter up in Yonkers with the Yonkers Director of Sustainability, Mr. Serator, William Serator, who is very enthusiastic about the Greenway. Would love to see it up in Yonkers. Says he's going to do everything he can to help us make it happen. And Laura and I and a former chair of the board several years ago met with other officials in Yonkers who had a totally different attitude toward the Greenway. You're quite right to say that the attitude in Yonkers has changed and become far more favorable because we saw it firsthand when we had that meeting. So thank you once again for setting that up and for your comments tonight. We have two more hands. We'll go on to David Gelman and then Steve Fruit.
Thank you. Jerry, a week or two ago, Westchester County Executive George Latimer broached the topic of Hudson Line trains going straight down to Penn Station, not just Grand Central. Obviously, that would have to go through Riverdale and Spine-Dival and across the Turntable Bridge. Has this gotten onto NMTC's radar yet, or is it an early political notion that you folks haven't discussed? And if that were the case, obviously there would have to be a transfer point to switch trains, and would that be Riverdale or Spine-Dival?
Can't speak to the service issues, but I can tell you that there's a major project called Penn Station Access that's moving forward, which involves the New Haven line and coming to the Fort Morris branch in the Bronx and through Queens and into Penn Station. When that was originally conceived, they were also looking at an option to come down the Hudson line and the Empire branch and into Penn Station that way, which would involve the swing bridge. Right now, all I can tell you, David, is that, well, both of them were on the table, certainly. The option that's moving forward at this point is for the New Haven line down through the Port Morris branch and into Penn Station that way. And it is called Penn Station Access. It's very much related to the opening of Grand Central Madison, which, frees up some capacity because some of the Long Island Railroad trains are not going to Grand Central. There's limited capacity at Penn. Penn is probably the busiest station in the world in terms of train traffic, and not so much the ridership, or in addition to the ridership. So that's, that happening certainly made it possible to move forward with at least the New Haven line.
But has there been any discussion within NMTC about Hudson Line going directly down?
Yes, years ago, but again...
recently, I mean, given the county executive's comments, which may be related to a political campaign and those efforts.
Possibly. Yes, but not recently, David.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, David. And we have Steve Fruit.
I just was curious to know, do we know who takes care of the maintenance for other greenways that are not too far away from us? So, for example, the greenway that comes up on the side of the Upper West Side and stops at, the old Fairway. And actually goes beyond that, but, it's really green up to that point. Who maintains that? Now, that's different than something like a trust, like the Hudson River Park, which is very well funded, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think there's a Bronx River Greenway, and there are other greenways that you folks, I'm sure, know about that are in the Bronx or alongside Upper Manhattan that may not have sort of, very well-funded special purpose kind of districts or conservancies.
I know the Bronx River Greenway has evolved from a community effort, and there is a nonprofit organization that basically is responsible for the Bronx River Greenway.
Is that the Bronx River Alliance?
Yes.
The Bronx River Alliance and the Parks Department.
Well, I'm sure that there's a connection.
Right, yeah, exactly.
With the Hudson River.
The Hudson River Park is the Conservancy.
Conservancy.
And the Parks Department probably has something to do with that too, but these are organizations that are longstanding, and in some cases were created to do this, so.
But I don't think the Hudson, I think it's called the Hudson River Park Trust. They end at a certain point in Manhattan. They don't, to the best of my knowledge, aren't responsible for the Greenway all the way up through Inwood. And I really don't know who does that. But we're part of it now, part of a citywide Greenways consortium, and they know everything about every Greenway in the city. So I'll find the answer to that, Steve. But that particular one in Upper Manhattan, I don't know the answer to right now.
Bob, I think the trust goes to 59th Street, and above there is Riverside Park.
That's right. It does stop at 59th Street. That's right.
And so everything north of that would be Riverside Park.
My point.
All the way up to probably Dyckman.
My point is just that, if that, it seems like a big obstacle and there's precedent, then, maybe it's not as big an obstacle, but I understand it would need to be put in place before the commitments were made. But it just other people or other things have been done, and we maybe can learn from that, or, state it as a premise and embarrass people into taking care of it.
You certainly can learn from it, but I want to point out that those other examples you're giving, the park is already there. This is a greenway in a park.
Right, right.
We're talking about here is a greenway next to a railroad, where the Parks Department doesn't, as far as I know, own any land there and is not responsible for anything there. So that makes it more complicated.
Yeah, no, I mean, the only part the Parks Department owns, as you know, Jerry, is Riverdale Park on the other side of the tracks, which, as you pointed out, is a Forever Wild Park, which is a further complication.
I do want to, one thing, I think we're through here, and maybe there's one more, but if you're considering starting at Spuyten Duyvil Station, there is that, I forget what the railroad calls it, but there's the two lines, the Empire line and the Hudson line apparently come together.
Oh, yeah.
And then go north.
Triangle.
Right, the triangle, right. Mm-hmm. And that was a barrier also, because how do you get over the triangle? Mm-hmm. You can't go through the triangle because it's an active railroad, two active railroads actually. So if you're looking at starting at Spuyten Duyvil Station, there's the issue of the triangle and getting on the other side of it.
Right. Well, in the feasibility study, what they proposed was a bridge over the tracks. In the same sense that you have a bridge from the street level down to the railroad, down to the station. They were talking about something from that street level bridge that would then provide the greenway access to the other side of the tracks.
Yeah, we looked at something like that, but the bridges are also, well, first of all, they're expensive, but then you have the grade issue is the problem. You have to be, I think, 11 or 12 feet high. You gotta get people from the right of way up to 11, 12 feet and get them back down again. Mm-hmm. And you need space to do. You need space to do that. You can't be like this.
Right. Yeah, I can't. Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's no lack of complications here.
Right. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Aren't there already plans since to take the existing greenway that runs through Riverside Park and they're connecting it into the Henry Hudson Bridge already that exists, that there were plans to expand it there, and then that's how it's coming over to this side, that walkway and bike path and stuff were coming over to the Hudson Bridge.
Yeah, there's a very active conversation and planning process underway right now in the Inwood area, because as anybody who's ever tried to use it knows, you've got a staircase, you've got a very steep hill that goes right up. I mean, it's really a horrible route, quite frankly. Yeah. I tried it a couple of times and said never again.
And you have to get across the bridge, and the current,
that narrow little walkway.
They're not gonna. We looked at that, and for reasons of safety on the bridge, they can't move that barrier out. We looked at hanging something off the side of the bridge.
Right, cantilevered.
Which is structurally feasible, but again, would cost money,
They are increasing, so that bridge. I was in a meeting with the MTA people for the Henry Hudson Bridge. There is a new project in place to increase the bike path there and fix those steps and everything from there as well to make it accessible.
But they're not going to be able to make it a two-way bikeway, I don't think.
Yeah, they will. Jerry, they are going to move the Jersey barriers inward. They acknowledged that about a year ago.
But the issue there is that's going to move into the breakdown lane. And the issue, again, and this may have changed, but, the issue is they're not going to make a full bikeway there. It would be great if they could, because that would take up the entire breakdown lane. They wouldn't then have a breakdown lane. They don't feel that can be operated safely without a breakdown lane.
Well, it seemed like maybe part of it was reducing or eliminating the slip lane. It was like
part of it,
but that would give them more.
I'm sure there's more space to be had there, but I don't think they're gonna completely eliminate the breakdown. If they do, they do, that's great, you know, but that was the big issue back when we were looking at that on the study. And if you could put a bike lane there, that would solve the issue of having to hang something off the side, obviously.
They are planning on expanding the pedestrian path by about 24 or 30 inches by moving the Jersey barriers partially inward. And yes, there are issues about the breakdown lane, but they appear to be conceding on that.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. A wealth of information here tonight. Everybody knows something. Everybody's got some piece of this. So, all right. Well, Jerry, you've been very generous tonight with your time.
Just one more hand.
Oh, there's another hand show. Oh, Jody's back. Okay.
Yeah, I think that bridge project is scheduled for 2025. I think it's with the capital project to redo the lower deck. I stalked the MTA capital tracker page, so I remember seeing something there to widen it for 2025. So that, and then the clearance over a railway is 24 feet. So that's why they were going to connect to, that's why they were going to connect to Spuyten Duyvil, because that's the height that one is. All this stuff is like coming back now. It's been a while since we dug into this, huh? But this is good. If we put our heads together, we all remember everything.
Right. No, this is a community effort for sure. Thank you, Jody. All right, so as I was saying, Jerry, I think I told you, well, probably something like half an hour, and well, we blew way past that, but thank you very much.
Sure, of course. Happy to do it, and not only because I'm a resident, but also because we were immersed in this for several years with the original study, and so it's there's some possibilities there, but there are huge challenges. Huge challenges, that's the reason that there's not a greenway there.
No, that's what I said. If this were easy, we would already have a greenway.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's not.
I mean, I'll say what I say all the time. I commute on the Hudson Line. I commute from the Riverdale station.
Right.
And when I walk down that hill and see the river and see the Palisades, and especially in the spring or in the fall when you've got all that color, I say, this thing just has to happen. I mean, this is so beautiful. Right. And, what a gift this would be to people of the Bronx, of Manhattan, of Yonkers, to be able to go through there and, it's just beautiful. It's going to happen. It has to happen.
One of my earliest childhood memories is my significantly older brother liked to fish in the area of Riverdale Station. Going down there in 1965 as a child, and his transistor radio, Hard Day's Night, was playing over and over again, and it wasn't a retrospective, it was because it had just been released, Right. So and it's always been magical down there. It really is,
It is. Someday.
I know next steps following the study that the MTA is doing eventually.
Capital needs assessment.
Going and looking up the 20,
Right. And at the same time, it's just constant outreach to all the elected officials. If we're going to be talking about the MTA, we've got to be talking to Assembly and State Senate. We're going to need federal money. I've been communicating with staff in Congressman Torres' office, who thinks this is a wonderful idea too. Everybody loves the idea of this. The problem now is, how do we make it happen? And it's, as we've been discussing, it's very complicated.
It would seem that, making contact with the railroad seems to be the logical next step.
It's got to be high priority, absolutely.
Bob?
I know that, like, with the Hudson River Greenway, or the Henry Hudson Park, like, the development of that nonprofit, so that it grew and had its own structure and board and fundraising, like, that kind of came along with the park, like, as they were working and developing the park. I mean, is that also part of, I guess that's what Cliff is working on? Or, like, is there already an organization? Because I guess he was doing, like, some of the nonprofit outreach pieces of it. Is there a nonprofit that's interested in kind of being the
Well, okay, yeah, so the Friends of the Hudson River Greenway have, an MOU, memorandum of understanding with, I'm blanking. Cliff, are you there?
Trust for Public Land.
Trust for Public Land, thank you, Cliff, the Trust for
Sure.
Public Land, which does handle, significant amounts of money. They get,
Right.
grants from the city and state and so on. And so, yeah, so there is a fiduciary relationship there if and when we get to the point where, you know, there's going to be a lot of money involved. I think probably, we're going to be dealing with some state agencies or some governmental agencies on this. I mean, it's not going to follow the model of the Hudson River Park Trust, which was a private entity that was set up for this purpose. This is all, I'm sure, going to be going through different agencies within the government, whether it's the city government or the state government.
It seems like a lot of times what the agencies are looking for is they're looking for an outside nonprofit that will take on the kind of day-to-day, getting people to it, marketing, kind of raising money for maintenance and like,
Yeah,
you know,
well-
and picking up the garbage and getting the little, you know, putting the people with the little hats and the sticks to go get the litter,
Yeah.
all that stuff, and that the state agencies, like, but that's one of the things that makes it kind of legitimate, for lack of a better word, is to have an organization that's got some, starting to develop itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of, community support for it, as Cliff well knows, we've been to a couple of street fairs, like the one up here in, Riverdale Avenue, the one down on, Johnson Avenue. We have hundreds and hundreds of signatures from people in Riverdale, saying how they support the Greenway and would love to see it happen.
Sure.
So the community support is there without
I'm
question.
talking about like checks, like the thing that because I mean I used to live in the West Village when they were building the Greenway down there, and it was just like an office. It was set up and it was like send us $100 every year, and they were building their capacity so that they had employees and staff, so they could organize volunteers, and you know that kind of capacity stuff seems also maybe important.
No, the organization of the Hudson River Park is a very interesting story. It goes down to Westway probably, goes back to Westway, and then after that, and it took many years to build that organization and then to piece together the land, which is now the park, you know, because some of that was private and it was city owned, and, you know.
And some of it was based on developments and assumptions that certain developments would go in, and the taxes from the
zoning had to be changed probably, you know, and
But it
so.
always helps if you've got somebody like Barry Diller with $1 billion.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, but then he wants to build his own island, so, you know,
well,
it's good news, bad news.
Yeah.
I thought that was Little Island.
Yeah, we don't have those resources, Clay, but we have the enthusiasm.
But unfortunately, again, in this case, there's no vision for this grand park because there's not enough there, you know, it's just connecting.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't mean that, like, again, I don't know.
There's a lot of there, though, I would say.
Well,
You're saying that the park itself, there's not enough there because there's not enough
I mean,
connection?
it's one thing to create the Hudson River Park and then put a greenway in it.
Right.
It's another thing to just put a greenway next to a railroad. And I understand the views are spectacular, you know, but it's a different level of undertaking. That doesn't mean that you might not be able to piggyback off of existing organizations, too, you know. You know, that's sort of the community side of it in terms of how that all gets organized. That might be possible, you know, just to provide the connection.
Well, we're, you know, we're part, as I said, we're part of this Greenway Consortium, the citywide thing. There's a lot of people with a lot of expertise in that organization that we can draw from. And the outreach, I don't think there's an elected official that we haven't communicated with in the. So
I would suggest
we're working on
it. I recall from before that there's something, the Hudson River Greenway, entire area, you know, that has been designated by the state.
Oh, right, yeah. Oh, and there's the Hudson River Greenway Authority.
Right.
We've met with the head of the Hudson River Greenway Authority, yeah.
If this is the one missing link, you would think that they might be interested in filling that link, you know.
Well, they did indicate that, there is some funding available, you know, but we're talking about a few $100,000.
Right, but I guess I'm looking at it more from the organizational perspective of supporting
I see.
You know,
Yeah.
of all the things you're talking about, who would take care of it, who would, you know,
Yeah.
who's the guy with the stick?
Right.
So maybe there's something there, I don't know.
Yeah,
But
no, you know, we haven't met with them for a while. I think it's time for an updated meeting. Yeah.
Bob, I just want to underscore what you said before, because as much as we rely on people like Jerry at NIMTIC to figure out how we can do it, it is the electeds that are going to get it done. For example, former State Senator Alessandro Biaggi passed a bill that got pedestrian input to the MTA bridges, and also onto MTA trains. Set up a committee for that, and that's basically how this change is going to happen to the pedestrian path on the Henry Hudson Bridge. And as much as Metro North thinks that they own their property, they don't. It's the governor who appoints to the board, and they decide how the properties will be used. And basically, as one of the MTA engineers told me, we can do anything as long as there's a will and a budget. And a will and a budget come from the electeds. And so our efforts with the electeds are going to be key to the success of this. And thank you so much, Jerry.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you so very much, Jerry, for coming out.
Sure, no problem. Keep in mind that ultimately NIMTIC is made up of elected officials.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
or their commissioners.
Yeah.
You know, and so it does come back to elected officials, no question.
Yeah.
As it should be.
Yeah.
Democracy.
Okay, we don't avoid certain topics here.
Yes, I know. Thank you all, good to see you.
Thank you,
and
Jerry.
have a good evening.
It was very generous.
Thank you for offering the cake.
Thank you so much, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry.
Here, thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
So, most of the rest of what I was going to touch on, review of committee member activities since last June, we've actually already discussed one way or another. As Cliff mentioned, he and I both attended the DEC, this was called the listening tour, the DEC listening tour for the Environmental Bond Act. And they had a meeting in the South Bronx, which, if I remember correctly, and I don't know if Cliff's still on, was last summer, actually. But he and I were both down there, and that's where they said, among other things, you should be talking to NIMTIC. And we said, oh, and we haven't talked to NIMTIC in 10 years, so yeah, I guess we can talk to them again. But, you know, and again, that's where we found out, well, environmental justice areas are the highest priority. And as we've discussed tonight, Riverdale is not, Southwest Yonkers is. But, you know, it's not just environmental justice, it's also access to the waterfront, and that definitely is an important part of what we're talking about here. So we are remaining in touch with the DEC, to see what will happen. You know, this funding is going to have to come from multiple sources, from the federal government, state government, different agencies. And we want to do the outreach and make sure that we're in touch with everybody who might possibly be involved. I've already reached out to the Army Corps of Engineers, and they said, you're nowhere near ready to talk with us. So, but we know who's out there that we have to meet with. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. The other did come up, and that was the meeting that Laura and I had with the folks in Yonkers, Bob Morrow, and their Director of Sustainability, William Serator. And as I said earlier, they're very interested in the Greenway. There's a lot of development taking place along Fernbrook Street, which is the street that runs right along the river from the treatment plant on the city line up to the Ludlow Station and the Ludlow Bridge. And there's a lot of enthusiasm for the Greenway. There's development there. Everybody sees this as a bonus for the people who live in the area and work in the area. So there's been a real change of attitude in Yonkers, and it's, you know, it's for the benefit of the Greenway. So that is pretty much all I have. Is there any new business that anybody wants to bring up or Any old business other than the Greenway itself that is unresolved? David?
Bob, I just want to say you noted the sort of the Harlem River, which is sort of an extension of the Greenway, and obviously is not directly involved, but just to highlight it so that people keep it in mind in the future. Several of us attended the daylighting of Tibbetts Brook, the Putnam South Greenway, which would at some point go over the track, believed to go over the tracks to get onto the Harlem to continue as a greenway. That has to do with, they believe, the developer of the Fordham Landing potential apartment complex. But I thought you might want to note it somehow that we participated in that activity and to somehow tie it to the Greenway, because, you know, as you mentioned before, the idea of wrapping around Spuyten Duyvil and going all the way down to the South Bronx, Randall's Island, you know, goes along with the mayor's plan to have a greenway all along the Harlem River. So, food for thought.
Yeah, no, thank you, David. I mean, that would be wonderful. There are serious logistical problems between Marble Hill and Spuyten Duyvil.
Yes.
I mean, even the railroad has serious problems there. It goes from 4 tracks to 2 down in that area because it's so constrained. Exactly how that would work, I don't know, but it certainly, if the Greenway were to be built along the Bronx side of the Harlem River from Randall's Island to Marble Hill, and if we were able to get the Greenway on the Hudson from Spuyten Duyvil to Yonkers and on up into Westchester, leaving a gap of about a little more than a mile, something, you know, there would be so much momentum to connect them that I think it would certainly have to happen. It may have to happen on street level rather than out in the water. I don't know. But, you know, first we have to build our Greenway.
Absolutely.
And then we'll see where we go.
And you've gotten the ball rolling.
This ball's been rolling for quite a while. I just hope it's going somewhere. So, anybody else? Going once, going twice? Nobody in the committee has anything else? Okay, motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Good night, Gracie.
Unanimous. Thank you
Good night,
all.
everybody.
Night, everybody.